All right, I've got 7 o'clock, and we'll go ahead and get started. It's good to see everybody here tonight. Miranda told me just a minute ago that Jackie is homesick right now, but she also wanted us to think about David as he's traveling back from his trip to Korea, his business trip. So with the hurricane and weather that's coming through, imagine flights and things are going to be on top of us. But let's think about those folks that are going to be impacted by that as well. We compare it to our own lives and our own challenges that they pale in comparison quite often. God, we thank you for these things. It's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen. Last week we ended be a proclaimer of foreign gods because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection. So first of all, before we go any further, let's read Acts 19 verses 9 and 10. Flip over there if you would. Someone read that for me. Acts 19, 9 and 10. Yeah.
But when some were becoming hardened and disobedient, speaking evil of the way before the people, he withdrew from them and took away the disciples, reasoning daily in the school of Tyrannus. This took place for 2 years, so that all who lived in Asia heard the word of the Lord, both Jews and Greeks.
So from this we see that there were definitely other influences throughout Macedonia, Greece, and in this case Turkey. And after his call to Macedonia, Paul returned to Ephesus and he taught at the school of Tyrannus. Now, we don't know a whole lot about him. There's not, not a whole lot mentioned, but people theorize that it could have been a lead instructor there that the school was, kind of informally named after. It could have been named after some dead person, famous dead person, where they quote famous dead people at the school, whatever the case may be. This is where Paul was given an opportunity to speak. And if you look at some of the other texts, it kind of implies that he taught at midday when the hottest part of the day was, so that way, people were wanting to kind of sit a little bit and be cooled off, so they sat around and talked about education. So with that in mind, we can look at this area that Paul's in Athens, and we know that there are a few influences present in the city that Paul would have to contend with. Now again, I'm trying to paint a picture in our mind's eye, about what Paul experienced there. So going back to our sacred way here, if you look ahead, you see a fork in the road. To the left is the sacred way where we were a couple of last week. If you go to the right, that takes us to an academy that is outside the city gates. If you follow that a little ways, you come to the place where Plato founded the Platonic Academy in 387 BC. In 86 BC, when Athens was sacked and fell, it kind of got destroyed. Here's another closer look at that fork in the road where he taught, but we didn't go to the actual site because there's really not a whole lot there, and it was a pretty lengthy walk, so we weren't that interested because there were other things that were more interesting. But we did follow the street a short distance. So this is a portion of the street that they excavated, and if you notice, there's some what appears to be some shops maybe along the way, because again, when we look back at Philippi and we talked about Lydia, where did they set up? They set up on the road because that's where the foot traffic is. Well, naturally you would have maybe shops or inns or whatever these were at the time set up along that path, because right now you're still kind of inside this. We're just outside, I think, the city walls at this point. But if you notice in the distance there, this is the modern day street level. So they actually came down, 10, 12 feet, excavating down into this area. Now the academy unofficially continued until 529 AD. So it started by Plato in 387, and it continued through 529 AD when it was shut down by Justine. Yeah, this guy. So Plato's influence was still present when Paul was there. The discussions that Plato had, or the philosophies that he had started, was still being carried on. So this would have been the others, possibly. Now the Platonic Academy had an interesting student or two through the years, one of which was Aristotle. He studied there for 20 years, from 367 BC to 347 BC, before he founded his own school called the Lyceum. So let's take a look at it. Now, this schoolhouse was actually on the road leading out of the city on the opposite end of town. Don't know why he chose there, but what he did choose was a gymnasium. This was a gymnasium that he originally started his teaching at, and that was kind of a common thing where they would go to these gymnasiums because this was the central location that people kind of gathered and congregated. So naturally they discussed politics, or they discussed philosophy, or whatever flavor of the day they would discuss these things. Well, I guess a sort of natural progression would be that it would become a schoolhouse, because that's just the way it was. So this was started just outside the city walls in 334 BC. And you kind of see the footprint there. Now, it was also used for other activities like military exercises, cult practices, Athenians' assembly gatherings here, philosophical discussions. So they viewed the mental exercises the same way they did physical exercise. It was a common combination. So in 306, though, BC, all philosophers were kicked out of Athens for 1 year. And then they were able to return. So when that happened, a lot of these schoolhouses kind of had a lull or a drop off, and I think that was the goal of kicking them out, was to kind of those that weren't really having a strong foothold. I don't know. I didn't get that far, but for that 1 year they were kicked out, and it probably had something to do with the ruler that had taken over in that time, and whatever that case may be. So following that, the school began to lose standing until 225 BC, when the last known scholar of Aristotle teachings, he died and just kind of left it to his colleagues. Normally they would pass that mantle on. So the school at that point fell officially in 86 BC because of the fall of Athens, but it was refounded in the 1st century AD. So its resurgence would have been about the same time as Paul's experience in Athens. So the thoughts, the processes, the studies that Aristotle had started, his followers were seeing a resurgence of that. So Paul would have had to possibly debate that. Maybe that's who he spoke with. He wasn't opposed to going to schools, as we've seen. I mean, he spent 2 years in a school. So there was, if there's a gathering, Paul was kind of there. You know, he would discuss these things. Yes, sir.
I'm not a study of philosophy, but Aristotle, what were their main thoughts as far as?
I didn't go that far. And someone asked me last week about the Stoics. I can't remember exactly, but we know these names, and that's why I'm bringing them up, just so we understand that Paul was. These are not names out of a storybook. These are names that Paul had to deal with their influence, and that was kind of my goal in bringing that up. Sorry.
I'm just curious what he was facing.
They weren't teaching Christianity.
No.
I put here a picture of a Roman bath just because I thought it was interesting, and that's how they would relax after exercising, and that's possibly where they were having discussions. It does, yeah, and he said it looks like a baptistry. So these gyms would have been used for daily training, but there were also other trainings that would go on there. You would have Olympians that were training there, possibly to compete at the stadium. So this stadium was built in 330 BC. Now it was added to probably like a pre-existing horse track or a stadium that would have held those type of things. But it was used until at least 144 AD. So this was in use when Paul was there. Now, it kind of had a lull in action for a period, but this was the Olympic Games. I mean, this is where, that started. So it increased in seating capability to where it was about 50,000 seats in the place. And what we see today, though, is just a reconstruction on top of that foundation. I mean, it's old. They reused a lot of it, but this was rebuilt in 1896 for the Olympic Games, the return to the Olympic Games. So very interesting that Paul, I mean, this is not far from the Lyceum. And so he's seeing this, he's passing this, and this is a very important part of Athenian culture, is that physical endurance, that physical being as well as. So we talked about 2 schools, but there's also other factors that maybe we would have to look at, or that Paul would be contending with. So what you're seeing here on the is a library. Now, there were other places of study, right? Libraries. They had writings from other philosophers and things of that nature. So we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but sometimes we don't think about the scale of these libraries and the things that they had, and really the modern conveniences in many ways. This is the entrance. On the left-hand side, you see the Corinthian columns there. On the right-hand side, you see the stairs leading up to the entrance. This is Hadrian's library. It was one, and so this is something that was kind of common in that area, that they would have libraries and things of that nature. This is kind of looking from the inside out. So you see from the inside out. So you see the scale. Now, from here, you're looking from the back, the scope, the scale that they have here. You can almost picture, and even here you see a gathering area where with the raised dais here on this side. So it looks very much like what you would see in an auditorium today, So you've got a speaker where he can, or she, I suppose, I don't know, would speak to the folks. They had reading rooms, so they could go off and have a private area, or an area wasn't so loud or anything like that. This is another example of some reading rooms. They had alcoves for statues, so people could probably worship in there, or at least recognize that there were philosophers that were, in statue form. Whatever the case may be, they had these things in here. So there's the library, part of this big library. It looks kind of small in comparison, but when you start looking at it a little bit more, you notice that there's what appears to be 3 stories. And each of those, you've got to imagine that each of these sections here were likely coming out away from the wall, and you had sections of papyrus rolls that were laid there and kept in those sections. So you can kind of imagine that to ourselves, right? And you can kind of picture it. Thank you. So verse 21, though, it reminds me of that. We're skipping a verse or 2 real quick, but I wanted to go to verse 21 because it says, "For all the Athenians and the foreigners who were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing." So that verse sticks out to me because they were in such search of knowledge, but they were missing the knowledge. And some of them, of course, we know the story. Paul was able to convert some, but some were just not interested because they were too conflicted in all these other things. They didn't know what truth was. And even if they found it, they were searching always for the next best thing. What's the next shiny object? So. All right, I said we skipped a couple of verses, so going back to those, 19 and 20, it says, "And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying," or Areopagus, however you say it, "May we know what this new doctrine is of which you speak, for you are bringing some strange things to our ears. Therefore, we want to know what these things mean." So, if we go back and stand where the Epicurean philosophers kind of hung out, as it were, this is about the view they had. Maybe a little bit further back because they were maybe a hair up the hill. But if you notice this treeless area here, where these people are standing, that's Mars Hill. It's not far from the Acropolis. It is in the shadow kind of the Acropolis. So, and just kind of give you the lay of the land, you notice right in here, there's a small valley between them, and it's quite the drop-off on the backside there. But if you come on the front side, you notice that there's this nice gradual slope that's fairly easy to walk up. In fact, I think we saw flashlights or cell phone lights walking up it at night, so there were little paths and people were going up there at night. So it's not terribly difficult to go up that direction. giving you a perspective. To the left is where the Agora is and the Garden of Epicurus that he purchased where his house was. And yeah, so that's Mars Hill. This is Mars Hill looking down from the Acropolis steps. So you can kind of see the cliff on this side where it drops off, and you've got a little bit of a dangerous area, I guess. But it's about 2 football fields from the entrance of the Acropolis to the dead center of Mars Hill. It is not far at all. It's further from where I'm standing right now to the Hardee's drive-through speaker box. So that gives you perspective. I mean, I can, because of this distance and the way it's laid out, you can shout and be heard more than likely if you wanted to. Maybe not over the crowds that were there, but if you notice a couple of things here, just giving you the lay of the land, right here is where the original stairs are. I'm sure they had other places, but this is some of the original stairs. They actually have that blocked off now, so you have to go over here and come up a set of metal stairs, but that's blocked off. So let's go look at it for a second. As you approach the stairs, there's a plaque there. It's written in Greek. It's really old, but it ain't that old. I just found it interesting. I thought I'd at least show you all that. But it's Paul's speech. But these are the stairs that Paul would have likely walked up to get to the top of the Mars Hill area. This was to the left of the plaque, and they're cut into the stone itself. Today you can approach from that gradual slope side, but keep in mind there used to be courthouses on top of this. It wasn't just a bare knob like I guess I've always imagined that in my mind because I see those pictures from storybooks or whatever. In my mind's eye, I pictured just this granite or this marble hill that he's standing on and speaking, but he's actually probably in a facility, a house, a courthouse. Much like that Epicurean area, you can still see the cuts in the rock that once held the corners of the original court. People have put graffiti on things all over there, so you see some graffiti there, but this is looking away from the Acropolis, and you see that slope going down, and actually our apartment is right there that we stayed at. But this building complex housed the Areopagus Council, and they presided over cases of murder, sacrilege, arson, but it was also a place of worship. So they combined all these things in their business houses or business buildings. So it's interesting that all those things blended together. There was no separation, as people try to say about separation of church and state. There wasn't that. They were all kind of combined. And then looking back towards the Acropolis up on the hill there. So it's kind of inspiring to be there because you are picturing Paul's bravery where he has been pulled from the Agora, and they're taking him up to this area where they try people. Now, if they found him guilty, which I don't think that's really what they were trying to do, they were wanting to hear him, but if they were to find him guilty, he would not be allowed in the Agora because that was off limits to people that they did not find worthy. So he just ran out of 2 or 3 cities already. He's coming here. So, I can imagine that it still took some bravery to come here, even though they didn't seem aggressive or anything. They seemed like they wanted to hear him out. But this is where they hold court. So, I'll pause there for a second. I've been talking for a little while. Is there any questions? All right. Verse 22, then Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, Men of Athens, I perceive that that in all things you are very religious. And it's true that they were a very religious people. We've already seen the temple of Hephaestus in the Agora. And when we think about Aristotle and his Lyceum, that was named after Apollo Lyceum, the wolf god. So even their gymnasiums were named after gods. and those, so it kind of turned it into a religious place. So here's a few interesting locations just so you can picture some of the quote gods that Paul would have seen on the way to the hill. If you're looking at this location, this is called the Pinks. It was a theater-like assembly area near the top of the Epicurean hilltop. If you notice right here, this is an orator's bema, and that's of course where an orator would have stood and spoken to an audience there, kind of fanned out in front of them. Above the bema was an altar to Zeus Agorius, patron of the orators. So they would make sacrifices to this deity before their meetings in order to have a productive meeting. That's what they were given a sacrifice for. So they were trying to do that. By Paul's time, this had kind of fallen out of favor. It wasn't as popular a place because they had actually built the Temple of Dionysus down at the base of the Acropolis. So most of that stuff that happened here had moved down there, but it was still in use. And it still held the shrine of Zeus Hypsistos. And so there was several shrines in this area. If you walk down to the base of the hill, you start coming up the base of the Mars Hill, and you'll see a sanctuary of Pan. Pan is that goat-like deity, and it's very hard to tell from this picture. Apparently, I didn't take a better picture. I don't know. That was outside our apartment there. There's cave into that rock. This is the temple of Olympian Zeus, and it was constructed in approximately 170 BC. Pillars were there. It just wasn't finished. But again, he's dealing with this. This sounds like a fire tone. Locations in the world, though. So when we start thinking about the Acropolis itself, really this is the prominent thing. I mean, in Colorado Springs, you knew exactly where you were because you had the Pikes Peak right next to you. You knew where north and south was. You knew where east was because to the west was the mountain. Here, you can kind of know exactly where you are in the city by looking up and seeing the Acropolis. So it's very prominent. And in that and around that, you would have sanctuaries. I count 1, 2, 3 sanctuaries, 3 temples, 2 monuments, all that were built. And that's not even naming them all. That was just kind of the more prominent ones that were built into the sides of it and into different locations. And then as you approach it and you go up to the main gate, the Propylaea, it was built to impress. This was built to kind of give someone a overpowering sense of awe, I guess, because you're entering into where the Temple of Athena is. Now, this is still the gate. If you look on the far left, you see those columns. That's actually the Temple of Athena Nike in that spot. And that's kind of on the precipice, kind of on the edge of the front of what we would call the front, I guess, of the Acropolis. And so it's very prominent where it's at. On the opposite side of the top, you will find the porch of the Caryatids, and these women here these women that are holding up the roof with their heads, those are reproductions. The real ones are down in the museum, but they are maidens of some sort, but that's what their name is, so that's why it's called the porch of the Caryatids. In between where I'm at taking the picture and the front of that, that's a fallen temple, and I can't remember which temple that was, but so you see they had a lot crammed into that area. In fact, I didn't say it a second ago. I guess I don't have that picture. In front of this...
You say they had a temple on every corner? Like you have church?
Yeah, exactly. They had a temple on every corner, and I'll mention it later, but Pliny, the historian, said that the city at Paul's time, there was an estimated 20,000 statues in the city. 20,000 statues, and you can imagine the majority of those were probably to deities of some sort. So, of course, we're all familiar with the Parthenon. sitting in the dead center. That's the central location on the mountain. Every 4 years, a procession moved from the agora, from that sacred way area, from the agora area where the stoas are. It would progress through the city until they came up through the gate, up onto the top of the Acropolis and into the Parthenon. And what they were doing is they were delivering a new white robe to the statue of Athena, or the idol of Athena. Now, it's probably not something that Paul witnessed, but he very well could have if he had spent enough time there and seen this display of honor to this god that they've made up. Now, something I didn't say last week is when Paul was coming down the coast from Berea, they would have sailed along the coast of Athens and they would have seen the stark white Doric temple of Poseidon. So they would have seen that and they would have watched for it, and that would have meant something to the sailors, being Poseidon. But they would have also seen the temple of the wingless Victory and other large temples as they came down. Now, the reason I bring it up here is as they rounded the southern tip, you know how they came down and then they came into that port that was kind of tucked into a safe harbor area. As they would have rounded that and headed into port, they would have been looking up towards this. This is about 30 miles inland, but it's definitely visible. So they would have been looking up there to see the 30-foot tall statue of Athena Promachos on the Acropolis near the Parthenon. And what they were looking for was the sun to reflect off the spear point or the burnished bronze of the statue. So you can imagine the sun hitting that and it being visible from everywhere, and just it would have to be quite the view for them. And Paul is entering into this city and seeing all this as he's coming in. So he knows what a task it's going to be for him to come in here and teach these people and to stand up and with boldness say the things that he said. Before we go on, any questions?
You know what the elevation is of that?
377 foot. Actually, I'm kind of lying. Mars Hill is 377 foot. This is probably about 500 foot, I guess. Maybe not. Maybe 450 something. But, yeah.
Does it have like a modern lighthouse on it?
No, in fact, nothing taller than what you see right there, and that's actually sitting up on a rise of about 5 or 6 foot, maybe a little bit more than the rest of the flattened part of the hill. World War II. It was not an observation point. It was an actual fortress, and if I'm remembering correctly, and I don't know why I remember this, they were trying. I think whoever was on top was trying to, probably the Greeks, were trying to get them to quit firing, so they gave them bullets so they would quit shooting at this location. I can't remember the story. Go look at it. It's pretty interesting. But trying to protect it, they actually gave the enemy, I think, ammunition to not fight. So Acts 17:23. For as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. Therefore the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. To the unknown God. Now this is not my picture. This is in the British Museum somewhere, and we didn't see it. I don't know where it was. I would have liked to have seen it. Wished I'd known it was there. This was actually found in another location, and they have found many of these type of statues or seats. It almost looks like a seat or a scroll laying on top opened up. But they have found these throughout many cities that say, to the unknown God. So even though they haven't found one in Athens yet, we can presume that Paul saw this. Not this one, but he saw this statue on the way there and kind of visualized what it may have looked like. As he's coming through the city, we talked about the things that he saw as he's coming here. So when it says, I considered these objects of your worship, I even found an altar with the inscription. So he is taking these things in, and he's going to use it to teach them as much as he can.
I guess it was pretty common at that time that you think of Paul being Hebrew, but he also spoke Greek because he read those inscriptions. And I guess that was like English you spoke most everywhere now.
Yeah.
Greek was kind of like the business language of the world.
Yeah. He's pointing out that Paul had to have spoken Greek in some form to be able to understand these things and to converse with these people. So, yeah. You think he spoke Italian too? True. Any other questions? All right. So Acts 17:24 through 29. God, who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things, and he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought to not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art and man's devising. So, Paul used frequently the things that he was experiencing around him to teach using that. Philip taught the Ethiopian eunuch from the point where he was at. You know, he said, "What are you studying?" And he told him, and he taught him from that point, and obviously taught Jesus in baptism because that was delivering the message. Well, Paul here is doing the same thing. He's attacking their pieces. He's dismantling it, kind of, money on to put these together, and all this stuff. It's for naught. It's of no meaning here. So he's directly attacking that. My notes are on one slide. That they are a special race of people, or that they're a more knowledgeable people, that they hold some special influence in the world, which, I mean, they were very influential. But he was telling them that everyone is cut from the same cloth. Everyone is delivered from the same blood. And so he's using that as a jumping off point. Next, and I highlighted this here, I underlined it, so when it says, "For in him we live and move and we have our being," he's not just coming up with words out of the blue. He's actually quoting Epimenides. Epimenides? How do you say it? He's a philosopher from Crete. He was semi-mythical in some senses because they elevated him so much. But he's from the 6th or 7th century BC, and they believed that he was a seer. He was a philosopher poet. And so he actually wrote the words in one of his poems, "For by him we live, move, and exist." So Paul says, "For in him we live and we move and we have our being." That sounds like he is quoting him exactly and saying in the next verse, or next part of the verse, it says, "And some of your own poets have said," and I underline this here, "for we are also his offspring." Now, Paul uses capital H because he's making the emphasis. Now, I know he's not speaking with capital H, you know, but we put the capital H here because we know who he is referring to. But what we may not realize is that he's quoting Aratus Phaenomena, and he said, "For we are also his offspring." And he taught that, he didn't teach it, Paul was using it to teach, but this Aratus, he was a Greek poet. He flourished in Macedonia in the 3rd century BC, but his only surviving work is actually named the Phaenomena, and it's a book describing the constellations and the weather signs. But in that, he uses that phrase, "For we are also his offspring." Paul is again taking something or someone that they revere and using it to prove a point about God. He is tearing down step by step their belief structure in a sense and filling in those voids by starting with the statue to an unknown God and then talking about the temples, talking about these things. And then he finishes with, we ought not think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art and man's devising. I told you earlier that it's estimated that there were 20,000 statues in this city. They were either stone, gold, or silver, possibly bronze too. But he is, again, attacking those things of worship, those idols that they have made and done this. So where would Paul have found about these poets? Possibly in those schools, possibly in that library. Paul was no dummy. He was educated in this sense. So he picked up this knowledge somehow and he used it for God. Yes, sir.
I was going to say that it wasn't really his knowledge, it was the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And it was really God communicating through him as far as what he said and what he writing. It wasn't his thoughts,
Yeah.
it was God.
So Jim has a point of order. He's pointing out that it's God's thoughts that Paul has received the knowledge of, and that's where he's gained this knowledge as well. All right. The last verses that we'll look at tonight, because we'll be leaving Athens and we'll talk about Corinth next week. Truly these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has appointed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man whom he has ordained. He has given assurance of this to all by raising him from the dead. And when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, while others said, we will hear you again on this matter. So Paul departed from among them. However, some men joined him and believed, among them Dionysius the Areopagite, a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So Dionysius would have worked in that large stoa that was over in the Agora, the one that was reconstructed that we saw last week. The foundation was laid, what was it, Michael, in 478 BC or something? And that reconstruction was built on that foundation. So we can imagine where the Areopagites would work. That was the main building there. That was kind of the official stoa, the prominent one, where most of that business happened. Now, that agora, as the Romans became more prominent, that moved over to Mars Hill, and that became where they would be at mostly. So you can kind of almost picture this individual being a leader of some sort in those two locations. So it's very interesting, the history there, and seeing this and understanding that Paul wasn't just converting, the common folk, I guess, but it was also those that held positions of power and had influence and probably was able to stand these things up. Now, if you ask a Catholic, they would say that this was the first bishop in Athens and things of that nature, but where they get that proof, I don't know. We have about 3 minutes. Any final comments or questions? Yes, sir.
I'm just looking at the contrast between what they expected and what Paul expected. All they wanted was knowledge. What Paul was teaching was commitment.
Mm-hmm.
Commitment to God. This is going to involve a change in the way that you think. You are trying to impress people with your buildings, with your temple, with your gold, with your idolatry. That doesn't impress God and doesn't mean anything to God. Paul just came with word not with anything else. So they were really disappointed for the most part with what Paul had to say. I mean, it just totally went against their way of life and their way of thinking.
So Dennis is pointing out that Paul may have disappointed them in a bit, in a sense, because he only brought words to them. But he kind of offered an invitation here. He says, "But now commands all men everywhere to repent." He's appointed a day in which he'll judge. Right? This God that Paul is speaking of is not like their gods that's asking for these gold things and just, but he's expecting commitment. I think that goes back to verse 21. They wanted the knowledge, but not the commitment. Yeah, they couldn't find a truth and stick with it, because nothing they had found, I guess, at that point had been truth. So they probably recognized that on a subconscious level, if nothing else.
After this, Paul went to Corinth, and one of the things that he wrote to the Corinthians was, the Jews look for a sign, the Gentiles, and he was speaking about this in Athens. They're looking for knowledge.
Yeah, the truth. Yeah.
Learn something.
First Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 4, and my speech and my preaching is not with enticing words of man's wisdom, but with the demonstration of the Spirit and of power.
So he's taking us to 1 Corinthians where it talks about Paul speaking with power. I started to bring it up a second ago. The words that Paul carried had power behind them. They had the strength behind them. And thank you. All right. Thank you for your attention. We'll go into Corinth next week, and then we'll wrap that up.
If you'd like to mark the song of encouragement, number 491. 491. After you've got that marked, if you'll turn to let's see, I chickened out on the one I did have marked, so. Number 22, let's sing that together. We'll try that other one another time. Number 22, Our God, He is alive. We'll sing 1 and 4, and then Brother Kelvin has our message.
Good evening, good evening. It's good to be here on this evening. I have just a few words on tonight. On Monday, and I told KJ beforehand that I was using him a little bit, but I had a conversation with KJ, calling him on my way home from work. And just as young people do, and most everybody, you're asking them questions, they give you a whole lot of one-word answers. But at the end of our conversation, there was something that struck me. He said, "Dad, it is really hot in this house." That did not sound good to me. I know when I left the house that it was comfortable. And now you're telling me, without anybody touching anything, that it's hot. When I got home, I got to looking, and of course, the AC has problems. Hopefully not that bad, but my AC guy cannot see us until Tuesday. But it struck a thought in my mind. You read everywhere where people have their thoughts about hell, where they will say that God is too loving. Therefore, I don't believe that there is a hell. But yet, no one ever hardly says this about the four seasons. In Ecclesiastes 3:1, to everything there is a season and a time and every purpose under the heaven. In the book of Acts, in 1:7 tells us, and he said unto them, "It is not for you to know the times and the seasons which the Father had put in his own power." Therefore, letting us know and helping us to understand that God made the seasons as well. So if you don't believe in hell, why believe in the seasons? In 2023, the American Medical Association declared that there was 2,000 or over 2,300 known deaths to be caused by heat, one of our four seasons. But they will say in that instance that we didn't take care of our neighbors. We're going through fall. In a minute it'll be winter. You guys are here all over the TV. If you know anyone in your neighborhood that's not able, that does not have the funds, fixed income, make sure they get plenty of blankets, make sure they get plenty of heat. If they need to move in with somebody for a while during the coldest parts of the month, make sure you do so. Same thing with the heat. And all on every job, they're telling you about water, fruit, what to do, all kind of paperwork telling you about this heat. But yet, there are many that don't believe in hell. Through our study in the apologetics, it came up about the earth and such. Any farther away from the sun, the earth would freeze. Any closer to the sun, the world would burn up. God hung it and everything around it in its proper place. But that same God that made the sun, we understand that we need that sun to sustain our life. So we don't fuss about it. We don't disbelieve the sun and its purpose. Hell is a real place for a just purpose. Heaven is a real place for a just purpose. And that purpose is reward for deed. Galatians 6, 7 through 9, the sowing and reaping process can help us to understand that. Matthew 25, 31 through 46, which is a little lengthy, but I have a place I'm going with that. It is by choice that God gives all mankind the ability to choose right or wrong. That is up to us. But with that right and with that wrong, there's reward. And it has to be a place where we have to receive that reward. So therefore, if you believe in heaven, you have to believe in hell. Look at all the wickedness that's going on around us. Do you think that these people who refuse to do what God has said are going to haphazardly just fall into heaven? No matter what you do? Can't be. Can't be. Matthew 25, 31 through 46 would kind of help us to realize. It's this song that we sing during the young devotional. I don't want to be a goat. Nope. I just want to be a sheep. Bad. But God is here, or Jesus, telling us about the goats and the sheep and what's going to happen to the goats and the sheep. Understanding that the goat represents the sinfulness and the sheep, humble, righteous. And when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them from one another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come ye, blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, you gave me meat. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. God, or Jesus, is talking about the deeds that mankind are supposed to do. He likened this and these deeds as us doing these things to him or not doing these things to him. Naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison, you came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee hungry, and we fed thee, thirsty, and we gave you drink? When saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? And then Jesus is going to give an answer for that. You have done what you were supposed to do. Mark 12, 29, 30, 31. First of all, our whole soul, mind, body is for the love of God. And then the second is like unto this, love your fellow man. And this is where this comes in. And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto me, or the least, of these brethren, you have done it unto me. Then shall I say to them at the left hand, Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire. I want you guys to hear this and hear it well. Hell is real. But Christ said it was prepared for the devil and his angels, not for us. For I was hungry, and you gave me no meat. I was thirsty, you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you took me not in. Naked, you clothed me not. Sick, and in prison, you visited me not. Then shall they also answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee hungry, athirst, a stranger, naked, or sick, in prison, and did not minister unto thee? Then shall he answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it not to one of the least of these, you did also that wrong unto me. And these shall go away, the goat, those on the left side, into everlasting punishment, hell, but the righteous into life eternal. It's a strange thing that we all believe in heaven. But when it comes down to the punishment of a reward of punishment, we don't believe in that. Most of us, a lot of us. I know we do here. God has proven the depth of his love. John 3:16, 17, Romans 5, 7 through 9. But I want to leave you with a thought that I would perhaps use as I talk to those who don't believe in hell. Instead of not believing in hell because you feel like God loves us too much, believe in it because of this. God will allow you to go to hell, not because he does not love you, but in contrary, but because you do not love him. Hell is not on God. It is on the person that chooses to do wrong. And if you want to go there, God is not going to force your hand, just like he's not going to force your hand at doing right. But these are the two options that we have. If you love me, John 14:15, you'll keep my commandments. Well, what are God's commandments? He has many, many. But first, he wants you to clean yourself up. He does not want any of us to go to hell. It is his wish that all men be saved. But you first must hear what he has to say. You must hear how he sent his only begotten son. See, God did a lot for us. Things that we cannot pay him back for. We must believe that he sent Jesus, and through Jesus we can be saved. We must repent, Luke 13:3. Confess Christ before men, and Christ said, I'll confess you before my Father, Matthew 10:32. And you must be baptized, 1 Peter 3:20 and 21. But if you have walked away from the commandments of God, you too must repent. 1 John 1:7, if you walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship one with another. And the blood of Christ can wash us clean continually if we just get back on the right track. Again, God would not allow you to go to hell because he doesn't love you, but because you don't love him. So why not do what he asked you to do? It's just as simple as that. Either do it or don't do it. But if you do it, you're reciprocating the love that God is showing to you. Hell is real. Please, as the song we sing and the children sing, I don't want to be a goat. No. We just want to be sheep and follow the good shepherd. Because he is the only door. He is the way, he is the truth, and he is our life. So will you give yourself to him tonight? By way of baptism, by way of rededication. It is your choice. As we stand and sing the song that has been selected, will you sing?
Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it. Redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed through His infinite mercy. His child forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, redeemed. His child and forever I am. Redeemed and so happy in Jesus. No language my rapture can tell. I know that the light of His presence with me doth continually dwell. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, redeemed, His child and forever I am.
We have a number of people to add to our list. Sister Anita has foot problems, so we want to keep her in our prayers. Jeremy's at home. Sister Rosie Price was thinking that she was going to be readmitted to rehabilitation, but because of some insurance problems, she just went for therapy. And so she's back at home, so let's keep her in our prayers as she tries to recover. Also, we've been aware that Judy Ingram was trying to get her surgery scheduled. They called her, and it's going to be tomorrow in Alabaster, and I think it's Shelby Regional, I think is the name of the hospital there. And she'll be in the hospital for 3 or 4 days, so let's keep them in our prayers. Larry and Andrea are also at home, not feeling well. So a number of individuals that we want to keep in our prayers. Have an announcement about a meeting that's going to be taking place at Midway. It starts this coming Sunday. We'll post that on the board. It goes through Wednesday. Let's...
Brother Terry, the preacher at Midway, Bill Stoudemire, is a member of our fire department.
Right.
We'd like to try to, if there's enough people that want to go on Tuesday, we'd like to try to take the bus. So please let me know if you want to go, and if we've got enough together.
Okay. All right, so if we'll make a plan as far as going as a group on Tuesday, so let Jeremy know if able to go. Also failed to mention that we'd like to thank you for all the help that you gave in preparing the boxes for Panama. They say that tomorrow there's going to be a work day, getting everything ready as far as shipping goes, and so if you would let Beverly know about that if you're able to go. I guess some of it depends on the weather, maybe. Saturday, everything signed up and ready to go?
Yeah, as far as I know right now, Saturday is still on as scheduled, and I will let you know if it changes. The Village Green Park does kind of have a water issue, so it could be wet, so you might not want to wear your best shoes if they have it.
So you guys don't wear any high heels? I think that- that-
Our friend Carrie Taylor had her first chemotherapy, it went well.
Okay. All right, so let's keep, first name's Taylor, is that right? Tara. Okay. All right, so let's keep them in our prayers. Yes, sir.
One of the men that I served with, he was having some problems with addiction, but he's in recovery, and his mother was diagnosed with stage 4 cervical cancer, and it has metastasized to her body. And when I spoke to him today, she, after having her first chemo, has gone downhill
Right.
completely. She's in the hospital now, and they're looking at possible renal failure. So, I'm just, have some prayer for him. His name's Casey Moran. He's been fighting a lot of things. This is not going to help.
Right. Okay. We don't know what all people are facing, double things with this young man. And so let's keep the family in our prayers as they go through this period of time. So if you've signed up for Saturday, make sure that you look.
Our ability to come together, to learn about your word, Father, to understand more about
about the landscape and Bible times, and Father, to understand always to choose heaven and choose to have the right relationship with you that we need, and help us to reach out to those around us so that they